The King paid £12.9 million in tax in the financial year 2024-2025. Prince William's personal tax bill has also been published, showing he paid £7.76 million in the same year. The sovereign grant, the taxpayer-funded amount that the government uses to pay for the monarch's official duties, is going up. In 2024, it stood at £51.8 million. That rose to £72.1 million in 2025, and in the year 2027-28, this will rise significantly to very nearly £100 million. It's also been announced that the King and Queen will not live at Buckingham Palace following its £369 million refurbishment. Well, our royal editor Chris Shipp is here. Chris, we'll be talking about the King's living arrangements in a minute. But first, on the sovereign grant, why is it going up by so much?
I mean, there's a lot to get through in what you've just announced with those figures. Let's deal with the sovereign grant. So going up to £99.9 million. That's a lot of money and almost double what it was a few years ago at £51 million. We're told there's lots of reasons for that. One is that actually, because of inflation in recent years, a lot of the royal residences and the historic buildings they look after, there's been a backlog of repairs. The other thing is that the King is a bit worried about his cyber security. He's head of state after all, and there's all these interferences coming in from Russia, China and elsewhere. And also there's this issue that we do have a monarch and a consort in King Charles and Queen Camilla who are, frankly, a lot busier than Queen Elizabeth was at the end of her reign. In order to get him places and get them both in various parts of the country, it costs money, and therefore that's part of the reasons why they're going up. On the tax, though, Geraint, I mean, yes, they say it's all about transparency. We've never had a monarch before say that how much tax he's actually paid. So this is income tax and capital gains. Royals don't pay inheritance. But we don't know how they got to that figure. And therefore, we've just got a top amount. The King, according to the palace, is in the top 100 of taxpayers. But we don't know how they got this. So transparency, yes, but only so far.
And why, after spending all that money doing up Buckingham Palace, are the King and Queen not going to live there?
Good question. £369 million over 10 years we've been spending on doing up the palace. Not just doing up, it was actually falling down. It needed a lot of work. And you can see from some of the renovation pictures here, this is not just a simple paint job. But the King and Queen won't be moving back in because actually they live at Clarence House. They see the Buckingham Palace as the office, not as the home. But when I spoke earlier to the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Margaret Hodge, who's now Baroness Hodge, she thinks, you know what, you're the King, we just paid a lot of money, you should be living there.
I think it's a problem that we have just spent £370 million of your money, my money, taxpayers' money, repairing Buckingham Palace so that it was fit for the King and the Queen to live in, and for them then to decide not to use the palace. So I think there is a problem. I would hope that they're opening up the whole of the palace to visitors, and if that happens, that will be a good thing.
I should point out that Prince William's office has also let it be known that he does not intend to live at Buckingham Palace when there is a change of reign. He's going to stay in Windsor. So the last time a monarch lived in Buckingham Palace was Queen Elizabeth, and that was in March 2000.
OK, Chris, many thanks.
If you want more royal news, then tune in to our Talking Royals podcast, available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Here's a taste of what we discussed on this week's episode.
Now, one of the things that people have gone really big on, Chris, in the headlines the past couple of days, is that the King and Queen will not be returning to residing at Buckingham Palace, which, for those of us who are really hot on our royal knowledge, sort of knew anyway.
Yeah, we kind of did, because we know that the King and Queen really love living at Clarence House, which was where they lived when they were the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall before the death of the late Queen. But we'd never really, to be fair, Charlene, expect them to move back into Buckingham Palace. However, we've come to the end of the 10-year rebuilding work of the palace, which, as we've discussed before, has cost £369 million. And to be fair, the building needed it. It was kind of falling down, and it hadn't been done since the Second World War. But the question is, when you're spending nearly £370
million, don't you expect your king and queen to move back in? So we're not talking about the whole palace. To be fair, I'd say like 90% of that palace is offices and staterooms and function rooms and, HR department and press offices and all the rest of it. But there is a little corner that overlooks Green Park where the late Queen used to have her private apartments. Those private apartments are still available to King Charles and Queen Camilla should they want to use them. But we were told this week they are going to stay in Clarence House. They're not ever going to move back into Buck Pal.
Yeah, but this is the first time that any reigning monarch hasn't lived at Buckingham Palace. And surely there's got to be an element of expectation that you are the head of state, you are the king, and that comes with a lot of bells and whistles, that comes with a lot of benefits, a ton of benefits. And surely should they not do as expected and live in the one house where we expect to be able to see them wandering around in the garden and having a coffee on the balcony?
Well, you have to go back to 1837 when Queen Victoria came to the throne, and that is when Buckingham Palace became the sort of personal residence of the sovereign. And right up until the late Queen Elizabeth II, she spent her last night at Buckingham Palace in March 2020 before she moved to Windsor Castle, where she isolated during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then lived predominantly at Windsor Castle from then on. So this is a change, but as Chris says, I think it is something we probably expected. We've just had it confirmed. But we are told that Buckingham Palace will remain monarchy HQ. It'll remain the beating heart of the monarchy. It will be used for all the ceremonial and operational work that you would expect. He'll just be round the corner with the Queen at Clarence House. It's just a short journey, and they will still, it will still be used very much in the same way. And actually, I was thinking about this when I was coming in this morning, and because he often drives from Clarence House to Buckingham Palace, he makes that short journey. It often is a chance for members of the public who are in that area to get to see him. And he often drives, with the windows slightly down, waves at the crowds. So potentially people might actually get to see him a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess I compare it to things like Downing Street, I suppose, Chris. And it's a tiny little flat that the Prime Minister and his or her family have to live in over at Downing Street. And then they have an option of the summer residence where they can also hang out. But I imagine that it's not particularly the best environment for the Prime Minister, and especially if they've got quite a few kids, to live in. But they have to, because that is what is expected of them. And they can hang out at Chequers at a weekend if it's sunny. But there is a level of expectation, and that's what they do. And yes, it may seem weird to live in quite a large cavernous environment that is Buckingham Palace, but with the job, should there not be certain responsibilities, Chris?
I suppose the point is, has anyone noticed any difference since, as Lizzie said, March 2020, when Queen Elizabeth moved out of there for the last time, never really went back because, of course, she died at Balmoral. Has anyone noticed any difference that the late Queen and the now King hasn't been living there? It's still the Buckingham Palace. The sovereign's flag is still flying above the palace. But I think there's something, as you alluded to, Charlene, about the mystique. If you're going to pay tickets to go around Buckingham Palace, are you doing it because you might just bump into the king? In reality, no one ever does that. But it does mean, and we'll probably get onto this now, is if the king's not living there and the security's not there, and you don't have to worry about that sort of privacy aspect, you could potentially open up the Buckingham Palace more often to members of the public. And that's a body of work that they're going through at the moment. So rather than just doing it during the summer months when they're not there, perhaps the rest of the year now it could be open to the public.
Okay, so we'll have a lot more access to Buckingham Palace, but does that mean we'll be able to go into areas that perhaps we weren't able to go into before, since they will no longer, or they've confirmed that they won't be living there full time?
So we know that they will still retain private rooms at Buckingham Palace where they could, perhaps retire during the day if they had a series of engagements at Buckingham Palace. and I think it will still be very much used. The balcony will be used. It will still be used for state visits, and potentially, if you had, a head of state visiting, they could stay at Buckingham Palace if they wanted to. So there will be that possibility there. And as Chris says, it does allow the palace to be open up a lot more for public access. And we have seen that's sort of been one of the King's visions, to open up the palaces and the residences a lot more to the public. And if they're not living there, then the security around them, it allows, much more public access, because there's not so much security around royals living in that palace.